afternoon, Stephen.
Good afternoon.
We have here with us Stephen Omollo, the CEO of Plan International, who's happened to be in Jakarta for a visit. And I believe this is the first time for him to Jakarta. And this is, I think, a really great opportunity for us from Plan Indonesia to begin this series of podcasts that we would like to highlight leadership and thought leadership as well from development sector, not just from Plan, but also from development sector in general from Indonesia, to be shared with a wider audience. With that, then Stephen, just something like first, what can you get, your impression from your few days visit in Indonesia so far?
Well, first of all, grateful that I'm the first person to be asked to do this podcast with you here, Dini, and in my inaugural visit to Indonesia and now in Jakarta. And it has been wonderful so far since my arrival here over the last couple of days. Well, two things that struck me. The first is the level of innovation that I see in Indonesia. Now, it is something that perhaps is obvious in the eyes of those who know the context here well, but as a visitor, I was struck by that heightened awareness and application of innovation in everything that is being done here. Now, that cuts across civil society, NGOs, private sector, and government, and the others. But then secondly was the warmth of the Indonesian people. I said it earlier, and I'll repeat it here again in this podcast, that the values that you bestow and those values of humanity, you see it in the faces and the actions of Indonesian people. It's so nice to see that there are still decent human beings in this world.
Thank you. Yeah, we are so happy and then welcome you and the delegation very warmly to our country. But Indonesia is indeed one of the least understood country and less well known. So I believe you shared some with me on the journey the other day. But what would you like to tell the world about these countries and the development?
I was struck that we have 17,000 islands in Indonesia. That is mind-boggling. When I was told that we have that number of islands in this country, and that the most populous Islamic nation really in the world, and just the diversity that you see in this country is mind-boggling, which is good, but also that this country suffers tremendously from climate action and the impact of climate change, and the different disasters that happen here. And yet the country has been able to adopt and have resilience and coping mechanisms to withstand those shocks. Now, that does not mean that there's a lot of developmental needs and the humanitarian needs in this country. And I think that the categorization of World Bank is the right one in terms of the upper middle income status in the country. But the problem with that is that it undermines the development aid that is supposed to be still coming to this country to support the various levels of vulnerabilities. And I mentioned some of them. I think this country still needs a lot of development support to respond to crisis, but also to ensure that the sustainability goals are addressed. So that is what I can say, but I was truly impressed in terms of the diversity that exists in this country.
Indonesia is very diverse. You are visiting Jakarta, which is not a reflection of the country in totality. There's huge inequality. Indonesia is now emerging economies, member of the G20. In particular, I know that Plan International has looking into G20 as well as a force. And perhaps you can tell us what is your view in terms of how do you see the position of an organization like Plan vis-a-vis the G20?
Well, first of all, congratulations to Indonesia for hosting a G20 in the next couple of days, but also to take over the presidency of G20. G20 for me, before I come to Plan International and what we can do, I think G20 is a very powerful platform but which is underutilized. In my viewpoint, I think the G20 stands a very good position to do what G7 is unable to do. And how I wish that with the presidency of Indonesia in the G20, that we can create a heightened awareness to address the issues that matter for humanity. And that is ensuring that we have a peaceful planet that we call home, that we can address issues of climate change effectively, and Indonesia to lead us in this, and that we can talk about the injustices that we see today affecting girls and women, but also the rights of children. And I think these are issues, weighty issues, that Indonesia, as they assume the presidency of G20, can galvanize the international community and bring pressure to bear and addressing once and for all the issues that impact us in the world. Now, Plan International is a key stakeholder, and it's not only Plan International as an international organization, but the NGO, the civil society, all the partners must come together to address these injustices that we see today in the world. When we were told with evidence and data that if we don't act now, it will take us 300 years to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals effectively, it is a shame to us in the world, and I think we need to agree, Plan International and other stakeholders, that we need to join hands together to act now.
Thank you. There are two things actually I would like to follow up as a follow-up question from that. From your response, the first one, I'll deal with the first one. The first one about civil society, and we see a changing role perhaps of civil society since maybe the first time you joined the development sector. There are multiple actors, multiple challenges. How do you see the role of civil society within the changing context?
I think the role of the civil society has evolved over a given period. If I look back 10 years, which is a good timeline to justify my point, the civil society was seen as anti-government, anti-establishment institutions that were put in place to undermine the government's efforts in democracy in development space. I'm of the different viewpoint that the civil society has evolved to be the champion for democracy, the champion for development, but it is being done in the wrong way. I'm of the view that if we support local institutions, if we support local civil society organizations that sit with the governments to bring change and transformation at a national level, that we bring clarity in terms of the role of the civil society, not necessarily in the areas of activism, but in the areas of contributing to the political reforms in the country, contributing to the development agenda in the country, and contributing to addressing humanitarian crisis in the country. I think that will help us understand better the role of civil society and not mere activism approach, anti-government protestations, but a contributor and a collaborator and a partner with the governments and various stakeholders to bring change and transformation to the communities. The answer for me there lies in developing strong local organizations and strong local civil society institutions that can understand the local context better and develop mechanisms in place to address these issues. So that is my viewpoint about civil society. We look at it as a top-down approach. The Western civil society approach may not necessarily work in a Southern civil society context. I think it's important that we respect that and have a localized civil society that understands the local context and apply it in a way that is understood at the local level.
Thank you. You mentioned about local civil society, local leadership. Now at the development sector, we come across, and I think this is quite new, if I'm not mistaken, this term about decolonialization of aid. Can you speak to that?
It's about power. It's about shifting power. It's about not using aid as a conduit for justifying a political decision. It's about not seeing aid as a way of influencing a particular process in a country. It's about listening to the local communities and to the local context. It's about empowering youth-led, women-led local organizations that understand the context and the issues effectively. It's about not holding power and letting power go, and in fact, is about shifting the whole spectrum of delivering aid. A shift from the Western approach in aid delivery to a more localized ownership approach at the local level. And that means that power must not rest with a few at the international level, and that power has to shift totally, not partially, but totally, to the local actors. And that aid must not be used as a conduit for positioning and pursuing a political agenda. I've said so many things there. The simple answer, in my viewpoint, is that the way aid is disbursed today is the wrong approach. We need to discuss the new discourse for aid delivery that embraces dignity of human beings, that addresses the issues of values, and that addresses the issues of rights and justice. That for me is the most important thing, and we do that effectively by shifting the power. I don't think that we have reached a level today where we can say that we have fully shifted that power. We are giving with one hand and holding with the other. We need to agree and fully shift the power, and that for me will be a way of having a new dispensation of aid delivery.